sorry about that. Welcome back to the Chipped Cup Cafe. My name is Moka Kahvesi, and yeah, oops, as I mentioned, welcome to the Chipped Cup Cafe, where you end up when you don't really know where you're headed. So yeah, we're back at it again with some very nice and cozy ASMR reading. We've got a nice cozy book lined up for us today again. We're picking off from where we left off in Legends and Lattes from, I believe, a week ago or so, 2 weeks ago thereabouts. So, for those of you who don't know, it's a nice cozy story about a sort of retired adventurer who decides to retire in order to set up a small, tiny coffee shop. Hence the name Legends and Lattes. Now, I'm actually a very big fan of anything high fantasy. I used to play D&D quite a lot as well, and eventually delved into other tabletops as well, but that's sort of beside the point. Yeah, this time around I've also got about maybe 3 water jugs full of water, just to make sure my throat doesn't dry out. And I've also got some nice warm tea with me. I believe it's my usual black currant. There we go. But yeah, so for those of you who are coming on in, feel free to just sit back and relax as we delve back into the very cozy story of Legends and Lattes, starting from chapter 7. When they returned to the shop, an enormous gnomish crate sat in the street out front, and waiting atop it, legs dangling, sat a sturdy dwarf Viv knew well. "Rune," she cried, "what in all the hells are you doing here?" He leapt down and approached, tugging nervously at his braided mustache. "Just making a delivery to an old friend," he said. "Come here, you old stump," she replied, opening her arms wide. His face broke into an expression of relief, and he embraced her. "Have to say, wasn't sure you'd want to see me, the way you left." She got down on one knee to bring their faces closer to level. "I'm sorry about that. If I'd stopped to explain, tried to lay it all out, I thought I'd talk myself out of it. Wasn't fair to you or the others, but..." Viv shrugged helplessly. Rune searched her face, then nodded decisively and clapped her on the shoulders. "Well, you can tell us, now you're clear of it, true?" "Yeah, I can do that." Then Viv looked up at the crate. "But, the delivery?" Well, my brother Kana runs the carriage post out of Azimuth. Saw your name, was curious, and let me know. I offered to ride security. Done it before. Have to say, after seeing the crate, I'm fair burning to know what you're up to." Rune's eyes flickered behind her. "Oh, this is Tandri. She's working with me." Viv stood and made introductions. "Tandri, this is Rune. We ran together for years, I guess. Until very recently. Pleased to meet you," said Rune. "Likewise." "Well, we can't just stand in the street like this," said Viv. She unlocked the shop, then unbarred and opened the big doors. "Rune, help me move this thing inside." Together they hauled it onto the long table. Tandri followed them bemusedly. "All right," said Viv. "You're curious. You want to do the honors?" "Don't mind if I do," Rune replied. He took the edge of the hatchet he kept on his belt and gently popped up the corners of the lid, and they slid it off. Inside, nestled amidst wood shavings, was a large silver box, crowded with ornate pipework, gauges behind thick glass, and a set of knobs and dials, and a pair of long-handled contraptions along the front. "Viv," said Rune, who was standing on the bench to peer down into the crate, "I have the faintest damned idea what that is." "It's a coffee machine," mused Tandri aloud, "isn't it?" Welcome back, hey. My lovely mod and partner. Well, I believe you're on shift right now, so just feel free to sit back and relax as we enjoy the reading. So where were we? There we go. "That's exactly what it is," said Viv with great satisfaction. "Coffee," said Rune. "Is this what you were on about back in Azimuth?" He shot a glance at Tandri. Couldn't stop belaboring it. "Yep," Viv smiled at him. "Well, what in the hells are you planning to do with it?" asked Rune. "Let me get it out of here, and I'll tell you." They shortly had it up on the countertop and the crate out in the street. Viv drew the big doors closed again. She wasn't interested in another unexpected visit from Lack, especially not right now. With Rune here, she might find it more difficult to rein in her desire to knock him bloody. A pamphlet was packed into the crate amongst the shavings. Tandri claimed it and perused it while Viv and Rune chatted at the big table. After Viv explained her plans and what she'd done with the place, Rune gave the building a longer, more appreciative inspection. "Whew," he said. "Well, Viv, when you go at something, you don't go at it soft. Can't say I understand how you plan to make it work, but you never ran into a fight without knowing how it was going to turn out. Guess I'd trust your gut over mine." "Not sure about that," said Viv. "But I did my best not to leave too much to chance." Rune squinted at her when she said it rather, and seemed like he might press for more. "So, how's Galena?" asked Viv, hurrying past the uncomfortable potential of that topic. Can't say she wasn't stung, but you know her, tough as they come. Maybe still sore, but she'll be fine." "You know, if you want me to say something, carry a letter, maybe. I should write her, but I think I ought to take a little time to think about it. You'll still pass through Varian? Course. Easiest route to most places. I'll send her something there after I figure out what to say. Tell her... well, tell her I'm sorry I left the way that I did." Rune nodded, then drummed his hands on the table. "And speaking of leaving, I have to be getting on. Day's running down, and a long way to go tomorrow. But before I do..." He rummaged in a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small grey stone with 3 wavy stripes engraved on one side. "Blink stone?" asked Viv. "Yep," said Rune. "I've got the match to it on me. I know you're set up here, don't expect any problems, but you ever get into trouble, things don't go the way they should. You toss this into a fire, I'll get the signal, and we'll find you, that I know where you are. It's going to be fine, Rune. Well, sure it is. But also, maybe someday you find you need to get back out there. He held out his hands before she could protest, not saying he will, not saying it's even likely, but better prepared. Better prepared, true? She took the stone from him. Better prepared, sure. It was the last thing she wanted, but he was doing her a kindness, and after she'd left them behind without an explanation, the least she could do was graciously accept a friendly overture. "Then I'll be off," he said briskly. He rose and embraced her again, made a short bow to Tandri, adding, "A pleasure, miss." Viv saw him out. "It was good to see you, Rune, truly. Give Galena and Typhus my apologies, and Venice." Rune grinned at her, a swift kick in the ass. She said, "I'll see you. Take care, Viv." And he departed into the night. You know, I realize I've been going on for about 10 minutes now. Is the audio okay? I think it should be. Hello. Thank you for the follow, Lady Vermilion. Welcome to the Chipped Cup Cafe, where you end up when you don't really know where you're going. My name is Moka Kahvesi. You can just call me Moka. And tonight we are currently reading some Legends and Lattes. Thank you for the follow. Feel free to just sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Hi, hello, hello. Alright. Now where were we? Sorry about that. Viv returned to find Tandri still perusing the gnomish booklet. Honestly, there's no need for you to be here this late. I lost track of time. Should have cut you loose an hour ago. The succubus looked up from her reading. After all this, I think I have to know how this works. I'm not sure I can stand to be in suspense overnight when it's sitting right here. She briefly touched the gleaming machine. It looked so modern and glossy there on the counter. Thanks for a warm welcome. You're very much welcome. That is what we aim to do here at this little neck in the woods, or this little cafe on the internet. I'll be lurking while I do some work, but I will be here. Alright, feel free to enjoy your lurk. Hopefully you enjoy the story as well. Now, where were we? It looks so modern and glossy there on the counter. Gnomish engineering really was a marvel. It wasn't exactly like the one Viv had seen in Azimuth, but close enough. And now that Rune had left, her excitement rose, along with some queasy trepidation. "You already know how it works?" asked Tandri. "For the most part," said Viv, who stared at it, her eyes roving over curving pipes and polished glass plates. Sorry, I had to take a sip of tea there. Well, Tandri's expression had given way to something with more humor in it. "Don't leave me on tenterhooks." But, right, so... fire. Viv located the small door along the front and flipped it open. An oil reservoir and a wick were just visible. She found a long sulfur match, struck it, and lit the wick, closing the door after. And water. She filled a kettle from the water barrel, opened another door along the top, and carefully decanted water into the reservoir. Okay. While she retrieved a bag of beans from the storeroom, she heard a rising, gentle hiss, and by the time she returned, the gauges along the front had begun to twitch. There was a clever grinding mechanism at one end, and she poured a measure of beans into yet another compartment. She unlatched one of the long-handled devices from the front of the machine and slotted it in below the grinder. Once the right-hand gauge crept into the blue section of its face, she flipped the lever and a rumbling whine sounded as the beans were ground and packed tightly into the scoop of the handle. "Can you pass me one of those mugs?" Tawdry obliged, watching the whole process with interest. "Now for the final bit," said Viv, reseating the scoop in its original location, placing the mug beneath and flicking another lever. A louder, sharp hissing, a gurgle, and the machine thrummed as water surged through the silver pipework. After several seconds of increasing noise, a steady trickle of brown liquid poured into the mug below. Viv waited a bit too long to cut the switch, but she could tell immediately that she'd mostly done it correctly. The smell that rose from the mug was rich and warm and nutty, and perfect. She brought it to her nose, closed her eyes, and inhaled deeply. Gods, yes, that's it. Relief and elation surged through Viv in equal measure. I really like it this way, but for a first-timer. Viv held the mug under another spout and pressed a trigger along the top. And hot water... So what story is this? This is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. It's basically D&D but coffee shop. It's pretty cozy. We actually picked this up about last week, or 2 weeks ago rather. Our main character, Viv, is a retired adventurer who basically... You'll have to look into this, it's got a nice writing style. I do agree. It's a very nice and cozy book. Our main character, Viv, is basically a retired adventurer who decided to trade the adventuring life for setting up a coffee shop. And that's pretty much where we're at right now. Alright, now where were we? Ah, there we go. Viv held the mug under another spout and pressed a trigger along the top, and hot water burbled into the cup until it was nearly full. She turned carefully to Tawdry and held out the mug. "Here, go on. Careful though, it's hot." Tawdry gravely took the mug and held it in both hands, tentatively sniffing at it. She brought the brim to her lips, blew on it for several seconds, and then took a very cautious sip. Which reminds me to drink my own tea. Oh, that was loud. "No," said Tawdry. "Oh my." Viv grinned. This just might work. Alright, let's let's move on to the next chapter. Oh, now we're actually just getting into chapter 7. Whoops. When Cal next appeared with his tools, Viv proudly displayed the gnomish coffee machine. The hob was inspecting it with interest, thumbs tucked into his belt, when Tandri appeared. Viv made the introductions. "Charmed," said Cal, executing a deep bow. "It's nice work," said Tandri, gesturing to the interior. "I remember what it used to look like." The hob puffed up a little bit at that, and Viv was sure she saw him struggling not to smile, but he only nodded and said inevitably, Deliveries from the previous day's excursion began to arrive and continued piecemeal over the balance of the day. Cal hung the wall lanterns while Tandri and Viv uncrated and shelved the dishware, rolled out the rug, and arranged the tables and chairs out under the front windows. Mid-afternoon, Cal excused himself to run a little errand. He returned a while later, struggling with the awkward bulk of a wooden signboard. Breathing heavily, he set it down with the front facing away and drummed his fingers anxiously across its top. "So," he said, "I should have asked, but seemed you were undecided and nothing hanging yet. And after thinking it over, I thought, well..." Viv could swear his cheeks were flushing red. Ah, gods. He huffed and spun it around for her to see. The sign was in the shape of a kite shield, and the surface was routed out to leave two swords embossed in diagonal script, with a sword whose profile she recognized dividing them. You don't have to use it, of course. That's just a thought. And I had some idle time, and I figured, well, you need a sign. Can't have people thinking it's still a library," he said in a strained voice. The sign read, "Legends and Lattes." Now roll credits. Cow, Viv discovered her throat was a little thick. "It's perfect." "Well," he said, and then thrust it at her with both hands. Tandri nodded thoughtfully. "Very memorable. What's a latte?" "Bean water with milk," said Cal in a stage whisper, peering around the edge. Tandri made a face. Viv laughed and took the sign, holding it up to admire. "Just for that, I'm going to make you a proper latte, and you are going to drink it. I've got a fresh jug of milk in the cold box, and I was practicing this morning. First, let's hang that sign." Viv was tall enough that standing on a chair brought her in reach of the iron sign arm, and she looped the eye hooks over the spikes. Cal had clearly measured in advance. They all stood back and admired it. "One good turn deserves another. How about that milky bean water?" asked Viv, grinning at Cal. "That's one way to describe a latte." Made a show of grumbling about it, but watched avidly as Viv demonstrated the entire process, finally frothing the milk under a silver spout that jetted steam. When she poured foam into the mug and placed it before him, he eyed it, then her, and after gingerly blowing on it, he took a sip. His eyes widened. "Well, shit. Milky bean water. I'll be damned." He took another, longer sip and burned his tongue. "Now this I have to try," said Tandri. Cal gave it over while he whistled air through his scalded mouth. After a careful sip and a close-eye evaluation, Tandri pronounced it excellent. "There are gnomes in Thune. Why are they not serving this? She asked in a tone of wonder. Who knows, but I'd assume they didn't start, replied Viv. At least let me get a foothold first. Cheers to that, said Tawdry, taking a longer drink. Her tail snapped a pleased whip-crack motion. I'll have that back, thank you, said Cal, waggling his hand for it. Ain't you supposed to learn to make 'em, anyway? I've read the book that was packed in, but there is some kind of art to it, she replied as she handed over the mug. Come on around here, I'll show you, said Viv. She was smiling, and for the first time, the building, the city, this place, felt like hers. A place she'd still be tomorrow, the week after, next season, next year. Home. So, opening tomorrow, you said? Asked Tawdry, as they all sat together at one of the outdoor tables, sipping their respective drinks. I hope to, said Viv. Not really sure what to expect, though. If I'm honest, I'm nervous about it. Feels like there's something else I should be doing to prepare. But I don't know what that is, so I figure I should just get in there. Look, barrel-eye fish there, so there be. Oh, hello there, Wisp. Welcome to the Chipped Cup Cafe, where you end up when you don't really know where you're headed. My name is Moka Kahvesi, and we are currently just reading Legends and Lattes, so feel free to just sit back, relax, and enjoy the nice, cozy story. Thanks again, Hay, for welcoming the new visitors to the cafe. Okay, you stick here to sleep? No worries, no worries. Hopefully you can fall asleep relatively quick. Yeah, for those who are new here, Hay is both my moderator and my partner as well. Alright, so now where were we? Ah, there we go. But I don't know what that is, said Viv. So I figure I should just get in there and get bloodied and sort it out as I go. As we go. Thank you for the follow as well, Wisp. Moka makes me pass out all the time with ASMR. Yes, yes I do. And you love listening into reading streams while you work. I can relate. E-books are just really great. It does indeed make productivity go just wilding, for lack of a better word. Okay. Well, ideally, there won't be any blood, said Tawdry with a wry smile. But do you really expect folks to just show up on or at your door? Are you going to advertise? Advertise. Put the word out. Signs. Hire a crier to let people know you're open. You work as a game dev, so funky fantasy books at the brain motion. Oh, game dev. That's pretty neat. It's actually really cool. Well, hopefully this helps you stay productive. That's so cool. Yeah, yes it is, hey. Okay. Hire a crier to let people know you're open. Viv was taken aback. I'd never thought about it. For someone who has planned this as thoroughly as you have, I'm a little surprised by that. You've been learning how to 3D model, and Blender sculpting is fun. Agree. I used to do Blender back in like high school. And you're working on D&D based 3D models. Nice, nice. Well, at least you can very much get into the sort of headspace for it with this nice cozy fantasy book. I do agree though, it is hard to learn, easy to master. Alright. Viv felt both complimented and chastened at the same time. I just stumbled across the cafe in Azimuth. I figured it might be the same here. There were customers, though. Sure, that's advertising by itself. You saw people buying, repeat business. It let you know it was worth investigating. You seem to know a lot more about this than I do. Well, what do you suggest? Currently building some artificer gear a friend wanted to make you a 3D model. Oh, minis. Yeah, 3D modeling miniatures is always a daunting task, so kudos to you for trying it, or for doing it rather. Hopefully this helps inspire you. Tawdry thought about it before answering. Viv liked that about her. No harm in opening. We can find our sea legs. The problem I see is that even if you tell the city what you're selling, nobody knows what it really is. Same as Cal and I. Cal nodded. So, Tawdry continued. Maybe we need to educate them. Let me think on it. Tomorrow, a dry run. But frankly, I wouldn't expect much. I don't want you to be disappointed. Very inspired, but brain over. Alright, well, glad to have been able to do that. Viv furrowed her brow. After both of your reactions, I guess I didn't figure it would be such a hill to climb. I don't think you should be concerned yet, said Tawdry, briefly touching her hand. I just think we should keep expectations in check. Viv was ruminating on that rather, when she was startled by another voice. Well, miss, seems you've settled right on in. Lainey grinned at them, her face like a withered apple. Lainey, said Viv, I guess I have. Can't say I figure what you're all about here, but the place looks a treat. She squinted up at the sign. Nope, not a clue. She brightened and placed a dish on the table with a dark round loaf on it. Seems you're celebrating, though, and today's my bacon day. Baking day. Sounded like I said bacon day, but that would be nice. Oh, thank you, stammered Viv. She introduced Cal and Tawdry, and Lainey nodded and clapped her hands at them. Can I get you a chair and drink? Viv held her mug up. I can show you what I'm doing here. Lainey made a big show of peering into the mug and sniffing deeply, but she flapped her hands again. Oh, no need. My stomach don't appreciate anything new these days. Y'all enjoy that and bring the plate by tomorrow. She toddled back across the street. Viv retrieved cutlery, saw that what they surmised was a fig cake, and all took experimental bites. They each sat, chewing for an extremely long time, laboriously swallowed, mumbled vaguely appreciative words, and after a shared glance, burst into laughter, agreeing that the thing was wholly inedible. They sat and chatted a little longer, when Cal finished his drink. Seeing as how you're all set up and I'm paid up, he said, looking down at the table. Suppose the work's done, far as that goes. Plenty to be getting on with it, down at the docks, of course. Well, I hope you'll come by, said Viv. It was hard to keep the disappointment out of her voice. She had gotten used to having him around. You stop in, and you'll have coffee whenever you want it. I hope you do. Okay. Might just do that. Need the rises, he said. Viv thrust her hand at him. Don't be a stranger, Cal. He returned the shake, his hand swallowed by hers. You neither, Viv. Been good work. Somehow, from him, the words were touching. It was good to meet you, Cal, said Tandri. Then, with a nod and another small bow to both of them, he left. Viv's heart broke a little to see him go. While Tandri rolled up her sleeves and cleaned the mugs in the wash bucket and set them out to dry, Viv went into the pantry and retrieved a long holly garland she'd brought when she'd gone for jugs of milk that morning. For a long moment she stared at black blood where it was mounted on the wall, and then twinned the garland from end to end and stood back, eyeing it critically. It looks nice, said Tandri, drying her hands and startling Viv out of her reverie. I just thought. I don't know what I thought. Before, you could have picked it up and swung it at any moment, said Tandri. It was a weapon. She gave Viv a thoughtful look. Now it's a relic, a decoration, something from before. Viv nodded. I suppose you're right. Tandri gave her a little smile that was almost a smirk. I usually am. Something you'll eventually come to terms with. Well, you'll excuse me if I hope you're wrong about tomorrow. If I am right, don't take it personally. Viv snorted. I'll try not to. But she was still worried. While Tandri tidied up, Viv went into the dining area and the Scalvert's stone resting place. She tapped the flagstone with her foot 3 times for luck, and then withdrew the much-thumbed scrap of parchment from her pocket. Well nigh to atomic line, the Scalvert's stone of fire draws the ring of fortune aspect of heart's desire. I'll be leaving now, said Tandri, coming into the room and startling her again. Viv hurriedly stuffed the scrap back into her breeches as the woman gave her a puzzled look. Great. Sure. I'll see you tomorrow. Suppose I should try to sleep, but I honestly don't think I can. I'm sure. A sudden clatter and thump. They both turned toward the front of the shop. Viv ducked her head out the door. Lainey's plate still sat on the wrought iron table, but the neglected fig cake, which had been newly whole, was missing. Tandri joined her at the door and hummed. What in the 8 hells? Said Viv. Well, whoever made off with it, said Tandri. I feel very, very sorry for them. Alright, Chapter 8. Tandri was not wrong. The following day, Legends and Lattes opened to receive customers for the first time. Viv propped the big library doors wide, hung a sign that read open from a peg on the wall next to the window, and waited nervously behind the counter. Not one customer appeared. Viv could admit that it really wasn't surprising. After all her thoughtful planning, research, and preparation, she hadn't taken into account the most important thing. Who showed up to buy something they didn't know they needed? Tandri had seen the problem immediately. Why hadn't she? Tandri arrived with a leather folio tucked under one arm, but she made no mention of it and stowed it beneath the counter. Succubus took up a station behind the machine and made a pair of drinks. A bit of quiet makes a good opportunity to practice. She'd clearly paid attention to Viv's demonstration. Her first attempt was still a little bitter, and the second came out a touch watery. Still, they were eminently drinkable, and Viv found the aroma calming. The air breezing in the door was moist and cool, and enticing curls of steam rose from their mugs. Everything was in place, closer to the plan than she could have hoped, except there was nothing whatsoever to do. Viv spent the next hours pacing like a penned predator. Cal made a brief appearance, drinking a coffee while loudly commending its flavor, as though there was anyone to overhear him, until he eventually excused himself with a pained smile. They did, however, receive one unexpected visitor. Mid-morning, Lainey tottered across the street. "Morning, dears," she said brightly. "Reckon I should see what all the fuss is about," although fuss was clearly thin on the ground. "Let me have one of those. How much?" She waved at the coffee machine. Viv thought about the slate menu at the pub she'd visited and cursed herself for failing to think of something similar. Half copper for coffee, that's plain. A copper for a latte, that's for one with milk. I thought with your stomach. Viv rubbed her own. Lainey fussed in a pocket of her voluminous dress and slid a copper onto the counter. Tandri dutifully deposited it in the cash box and set to work. The old woman chuckled and twittered over the machine as it hissed and ground and gurgled, and she received her milk-frothed mug with a nod. "Very nice," she said. "Thank you both, dears. Oh, and while I'm here, I'd love to have that plate back." Viv handed it over with thanks. "Thank you kindly," she exclaimed. "Well, got to be getting back to your chores. Don't be strangers now." Then she waddled across the street, plate in hand, leaving the cooling latte on the countertop without taking so much as a sip. Viv sighed heavily. Tandri drank the latte. "So," said Tandri, clutching the leather folio in front of her. Up till now, Viv would have said the succubus couldn't look nervous. "I mentioned some ideas last night, and back in my room, I did a little thinking." "Oh?" Tandri opened the folio on the counter and slid out a sheaf of pages covered in sketches and text. She shuffled them anxiously. "Yes, well, I hope you're not too discouraged if you can let people know what they're missing. I think things could be fine." Her gaze met Viv's, "because it is good, this idea." "I'd hope so," Viv murmured, surprised. Tandri had been very sure of herself last night, but now she was talking fast, so afraid Viv would cut her short. She glanced down at Tandri's notes. "Anyway, these are just some ideas. I thought if we could find a way to get a core clientele, then there'd be some spread from word of mouth. Plus, having customers in the shop will attract others. So, I propose a sort of event." She turned the sheet around to face Viv. Tandri's sketch was actually quite attractive, and Viv could see the ghosts of drafting lines behind the design she'd made. A combination of block and script. spread, grand opening, legends and lattes. Try the exotic gnomish sensation. Free samples, limited supply. You drew this? Asked Viv, impressed. Tandri tucked a lock of her hair behind her ear, and her tail lashed behind her. I did. Anyway, we commissioned some posters from the inkmonger. We post them at the jobs board and get signboards for the street, like this. She produced another sketch, similar, with a big scripted arrow pointing in the presumed direction of the shop. This is amazing, Tandri, Viv said, and she thought the succubus colored a little. I, I don't know what to say. I'm overwhelmed. Well, if you're not in business, I don't get paid either. Tandri flashed a smile. Very true. The key is making it an opportunity that's limited. We want a lot of people at once, but not too many, or we can't serve them fast enough. We want a... So, let's just start with the street signs. And yes, you'll lose some coin on the free samples, but we're hoping for repeat customers. Viv noticed that Tandri had settled on we and smiled. How do you propose we start then? Viv could see Tandri seize the idea fully. I'll need some funds and I'll get these materials together. Tomorrow we start with the signs. I can paint them this afternoon, put them out on the street tonight after the doors are closed. Then we see what's what. Viv filled her purse from the strong box and slid it across the counter to Tandri. You've got my blessing. Tandri beamed first, then snatched the purse and gathered the folio. As she hurried out the door, she called over her shoulder, I'll be back. Viv's optimism had dwindled rapidly during the morning, transmuting into growing despair, but now her mood lifted. Still, success remained far from a sure thing. With glances along the street to make certain no customers were approaching, she snorted ruefully and shook her head, temporarily closing and barring the big doors. She slid aside the table, carefully pried up the flagstone and stroked the sculptured stone where it lay nestled in the earth. Come on, little lady, she whispered. Don't make me a fool. When Tandri returned, she labored under the weight of 2 waist-high folding signs, her folio awkwardly pinched under one arm and a cloth bag over one shoulder. I clearly didn't think this part through, she panted. Viv hurried to relieve her of the signs, and Tandri unburdened herself of the rest. No one didn't ask if business had improved. It clearly hadn't. She unpacked the cloth bag, which contained stoppered inkwells, brushes, and a few curious curved pieces of wood. Tandri handed over the purse and then set to work. She sat cross-legged on the floor, rolled up her sleeves, lay her sketches beside her, and began inking. Her hand was steady as she executed clean strokes with her brush, but there was no tension in her mouth. The bits of wood turned out to be stencils that she used to guide some of the longer and more elaborate curves. Tandri glanced occasionally at her sketches for reference, although to Viv's eye she barely needed them. Thanks for the Twitter command, hey? Less than an hour had passed when she swept a final snaking line across the bottom. She cleaned her brush on a rag and capped the inkwell, then stretched and kneaded her back as she surveyed her handiwork. I think my dog is barking, sorry about that. Viv thought it looked quite professional. Hope everyone is feeling cozy. Hope everyone is feeling cozy indeed. Were you a sign maker or something? No, just always had an artistic bent. Tandri turned to face her. I'd say we close up now and set them out while it's still daylight. You're the expert, said Viv, quirking a smile. I'll put them where you want them. Tandri stepped into the street, the first in front here. She pointed to a spot a few feet from the door. Viv carried out both signs, leaned one against the wall, and obliged with its mate, angling it so that the arrow pointed toward the entryway. And this one? Asked Viv, lifting the other with one hand. I was thinking the intersection, where you can see the high street. This way. She led her along Redstone to the corner. After Viv set the sign down, Tandri checked the sightline in a few directions and fussed with the orientation until she was satisfied. They returned to the shop just as lamplighter had began setting his just as the lamplighter began setting his taper to the street lanterns. So, you think this'll really work? Viv leaned against the door frame as Tandri gathered her things. Couldn't get worse, said Tandri, emerging with folio in hand. Viv's eyes narrowed. I don't know about that, she murmured darkly. Over Tandri's shoulder, she spied someone coming up the street. She'd recognize that hat anywhere. What's that? Tandri turned to follow her gaze as Lack strolled past alongside a thick man with a lantern on his belt and a badge over his heart. Lack rested one hand companionably on the gate warden's shoulder. He smiled and muttered something, and the badged man barked a good-natured laugh in response. Nothing, said Viv. Lack stopped a few paces away and glanced at Viv in mild surprise, then passed her to the shop. The gate warden looked puzzled by the interruption. The stone fae took a step closer, peering through the window. Quite the blade, Viv. I do hope you're not showing your teeth. He pointed inside. The gate warden squinted through the glass as well. Indeed, he agreed, patting the hilt of his own short sword. It's sentimental, said Viv, snarling more than she intended. Tandri looked back and forth between them, gripping her folio tighter. Should I be worried? She asked quietly. Viv wasn't sure how to respond to that, or it had dawned on her that there was more to be lost than the shop itself. Black nodded, his ruffles bouncing on his chest. 2 weeks, he said. Just a friendly reminder. Wouldn't want you to forget to set aside a portion. The gate warden didn't so much as blink at that, and any notion of tapping the local authorities for help evaporated. Viv clenched her fists, then forced them to relax. Guess we'd better hope things pick up by then, she said. Can't squeeze blood from a stone. Yes, I'm sure you'd know about squeezing blood from things, or extracting it in other ways. I imagine you can be quite resourceful. Rest assured, we are similarly talented. His gaze flicked to Tandri, and he bowed, not mocking. In fact, his expression was confusingly apologetic. Shall we carry on? Prompted the gate warden. Viv and Tandri watched them go. "What was that all about?" asked Tandri once they disappeared. "Nothing I can't handle. Don't worry about it." Tandri's expression was dubious, but she didn't argue. "You should get home," said Viv, forcing a smile. "The signs are incredible, and I've already kept you too late." "You're sure?" "Positive." Tandri nodded reluctantly and left, folio tucked under her arm. As the succubus rounded the corner, Viv stalked over, removed the open sign from its peg, and went inside. When she closed the door, she tried her best to be gentle about it, but it still rattled on its hinges. As Viv lay on her bedroll, she withdrew the blinkstone that Rune had given her. She turned it over and over in her hands, thinking about how clear the division between success and failure had once been. That clarity had never been more elusive. She put away the stone and did not go to sleep for a long time. Alright, chapter 9. She'd definitely harbored some hope, but when Viv went to hang the open sign on its peg, the sight of 3 individuals lined up outside the door still startled her. A burly dock worker, a red-cheeked washerwoman, and a ratkin in a big leather apron dusted with flour. The dock worker looked her up and down, surprised, and growled, "Free samples." He hooked a huge thumb at the sign in the street. "That's right," said Viv, propping the door wide with a river stone. The sky was still dark, and the morning air had a mid-spring bite to it. All 3 bustled inside. Viv had the stove lit for heat, and the wall lanterns cast a buttery glow over the interior. The washerwoman approached the counter and examined a sheet of parchment that Viv had weighted a few smooth pebbles. She hadn't had time to find a slate, so she hand-printed the menu, conscious of the crudeness of her attempt compared to Tandri's stylus work. It was better than nothing, but she'd have her new employee rework it later if she was willing. Viv hadn't bothered to add prices to the simple list. She didn't want to scare off anyone. Everything was free for the time being anyway. Coffee. Rich drink brewed with roasted gnomish beans. Latte. Coffee with milk, creamy and delicious. "Don't know what none of that is," said the washerwoman, tapping the list with one red forefinger. "Which one is best?" She'd put a little thought into this. "Do you take cream in your tea?" "Nah," she replied. "Hot and warm it is how I likes mine. So, it's like tea, is it?" Viv waggled the hand to the side, and then admitted, "No, not really." She looked at the other 2. "How about you?" "What she's having," said the dock worker, crossing his arms. The ratkin approached, got up on his toes to get a good view of the menu, and after a moment tapped the latte without uttering a word. "Done," said Viv. She set to brewing. As the machine began hissing and grinding and burbling, her first customers gathered around curiously. The ratkin squeaked in surprise when the brew began to gush into a mug, his oil-drop eyes gleaming. She slid the first mug to the woman, who cautiously picked it up, gave it a deep sniff, and a puff of breath to cool it, then took a hefty sip. She screwed up her face for a moment, then nodded. "Not bad, that is," she admitted. "Not tea, that's sure. Not saying I'd pay by the mug here, but..." She wandered into the dining area and slid onto the bench, hands curled around the mug. Leaning over it, she sighed deeply. A dock worker received his, smelled it dubiously, and somehow drank it in 4 long swallows. Viv grimaced and grabbed at her own throat involuntarily. The big man contemplated it, shrugged, returned the mug, and left without a word. Viv's disappointment was acute, but she still managed to call out, "Oh, thank you," in her best impression of someone who knew what they were doing. Tandri slipped in the door and quietly rounded the counter as Viv brewed the Ratkins latte. He waited with his hands clasped daintily, his whiskers twitching, snout quivering. He eagerly received the cup and thrust his nose into the curls of steam rising from the golden cream of its surface. After a delicate sip, he closed his eyes, clearly savoring it, and Viv leaned her elbows on the counter to watch. The Ratkin's eyes opened, and he dipped his head in thanks. He quietly took a mug to his booth, where he sipped his drink and kicked his dangling paws. "A promising start," said Tandri. "That's all so far?" "So far." The washerwoman departed, leaving her mug at the table, and eventually the Ratkin finished as well, delivering his empty cup to the front counter. He bowed politely and scurried out the door, leaving scattered dustings of flour in his wake. Tandri heated a kettle on the stove, filled the wash basin, and gathered the mugs to soak. "That was a good idea," she said, indicating the menu on the counter. "Really helpful." Viv gave her a sidelong glance. "You could do better, though." "Well, better isn't the word I'd use. I'm going to pick up a slate and some chalk later. Got the idea from a pub on High Street. We can hang it back here, and then you can work the same magic you did with those signs. Is that all right?" "My pleasure." Early morning customers, the sort of folks who rise well before dawn to begin the day's labor, arrived in a thin trickle. Viv and Tandri worked in tandem, explaining the menu as best they could and trading off between brewing and cleaning. The shop was pleasant and warm, and the smell of roasted beans permeated the air, drifting out into the street. More than a few folk clearly followed their noses in the door. Viv dared to hope. The morning surge dried up after a few hours, and business evaporated, even though traffic outside the shop increased. "And now it's looking like yesterday all over again," muttered Viv. "Let's not worry yet," said Tandri. But Viv noticed that the woman was scrubbing mugs she'd already cleaned. Before long, Tandri was aggressively wiping the surface of the machine, polishing it for the 5th time. The next few hours were, frankly, agonizing. At last, around noon, their first post-morning visitor walked through the door. He was young, tall, and handsome, in an underfed and aristocratic way. His looks were somewhat spoiled by an inadvisable beard, too wispy, too patchy. He glanced around as if searching for someone. A satchel of books weighed down one arm, and he kept looking down at one cupped palm. He wore a split-hemmed cloak, and the pin on its left breast looked a lot like the head of a stag. He didn't approach the counter, wandering instead into the dining area. Viv watched him with a wrinkled brow. "Acres student," murmured Tandri. "Acres? The Thalmic Academy. No, I visited my first day here, but didn't know the name. Looks pretty well to do. Maybe we'll even get some word of mouth. Students talk to each other, right? They talk, alright, muttered Tawdry with a hint of venom that made Viv look at her askance. The young man circled the big table and benches twice, then sidled into one of the wall booths, unpacked some books, and began consulting them. Viv shot Tawdry a questioning glance, but the succubus shrugged. They both continued to watch him. After about 20 minutes, during which Viv grew increasingly perplexed, she approached him and asked, "Anything I can help you with?" He glanced up and smiled brightly and replied, "No, thank you." "Are you here for the free sample?" she pressed. "Sample? Oh, no, nothing for me, thanks." Then he returned to his study. Nonplussed, Viv returned to the counter, shaking her head. He remained there for a full 3 hours, during which time he busily perused his reading materials, scrawling intermittently on a parchment, consulted his cupped hand again and again, and murmured to himself. Then he packed his things, rose, and approached the counter. "Thank you for the Discord shout-out as well." "Thanks ever so much," he said, and with a genial nod, "Yes, the command is a bit barked. That's fine, we can always fix it later." "I appreciate the effort though, hey?" After too much listless pacing, Viv abruptly decided that some sort of action was required. She left Tawdry with the shop and headed into the city to the trade district up north. It wasn't a market day, but she still managed to locate a big panel of slate, a sign maker's, and some stubs of chalk. She even found multiple colors. She figured Tawdry should have a palette to work with. There we go. It felt good to be doing something at least. The morning rush had raised her expectations for the rest of the day, but on the walk back she counseled herself against unreasonable hope. "Sorry about that, no need to apologize. I appreciate the effort." Certain hours were just better suited to the business. A restaurant was busiest at meal times, and a cafe was busiest at, well, she supposed she was discovering when exactly that was. Okay, let's keep reading until chapter 10. "Oh yes, this'll work perfectly," Tawdry purred as she took the chalk slate from Viv. She dug her wooden stencils out of the storage, then set up a big table and got to work. While she drew, Viv stood in the doorway, looking up and down the street. Lainey was out on her porch, sweeping as she always seemed to be, and waggled a cheery wave at her. Was morning really the only time she could expect to do business? It certainly hadn't seemed that way in Azimuth. The cafes there had been lively throughout the balance of the day. Perhaps prospects would improve if the idea caught on. She supposed tomorrow would give her an inkling. When she re-entered the shop, she found Tawdry examining the finished menu, which leaned against the wall. Again, Tawdry's script was far superior to Viv's artistic endeavors, and she'd used the colors to excellent effect. Her text appeared beveled, almost leaping off the slate. She'd also taken some creative liberties with the wording. "Legends and lattes," it read. "Coffee, exotic aroma, and rich, full-bodied rose, half a bit. Latte, a sophisticated and creamy variation, 1 bit. Finer tastes for the working gent and lady." She'd even added a artistic rendering of a pair of beans in a mug with an artful curl of steam. I like it. You're a hell of an artist, Viv nodded. Here, I've got a mallet in the back. Tawdry held the side level while Viv banged a few nails into the wall. Below the base, as a sort of shelf. "This slate was a good idea," said Tawdry. "We can change or add to it easily." Change? If you decide to expand the menu, you never know. Viv looked around the place inside. I'd hoped we'd have more afternoon, maybe around dinner. Doesn't feel like it's going to happen though. I don't know if expanding the menu is going to be a real concern anytime soon. Tawdry pursed her lips and tapped them with a forefinger. Let's wait and see what tomorrow brings. Free sample still, you think? Yes, let's see about repeat customers first. Her expression waxed briefly wicked. Hook them and see if they stay on the line. Never was any good at fishing. You're in a river town now. You'll learn. Viv hoped she was right. Okay, chat. So I'm just going to use the bathroom very quickly because I think I have been drinking way too much tea. So I will be back very shortly. Alright, and I am back. Well, that did not sound appealing at all. Whoops. Alright. Chapter 10. There were repeat customers, although Viv's supposed customer might be too strong a word while the drinks were free. When they opened, the washerwoman and the ratkin were back. The woman had a friend in tow, and there were 4 others behind them. The ratkin scurried inside first, wafting a cloud of flour, and pointed wordlessly at the latte on the menu. Tawdry brewed for the first rush of customers, while Viv watched the street, nodding to herself as a few stragglers joined the line. Business stayed reasonably steady too, with only a few gaps where one or the other of them wasn't pulling a fresh shot. "Seems like the fishing is good," murmured Tawdry as she passed by with empty mugs in hands. "You're the angler," said Viv, smiling. "I guess you'd know." She leaned out to peer into the dining area, where a scattering of sleepy folk murmured in tentative conversation. She glanced behind her and found that Tawdry was up on a footstool with chalk in hand, adding a new line to the bottom of the slate menu. When she stepped down, she caught Viv's questioning gaze and said, "Let's see if the hook is really set." They were still doing slow business as the morning crept toward noon when the Acres student from the previous day reappeared. He stepped smartly inside, registered surprise at the people sipping their drinks in the dining area, and, with only a distracted glance at Viv and Tawdry, hurried to a spot in a vacant booth. He unloaded his book satchel again and resumed his scribbling and the cryptic consultation of his palm. For the next hour, the man did nothing but avail himself of the seating, and Viv grew increasingly irritated. "What is he doing?" she asked Tawdry in a loud whisper. She shrugged. coursework, research, although why he's doing it here, I have no idea. Yesterday I was almost happy to have him, just to fill a seat, but if he's only going to take up room, easy enough to find out, said Tandri as she rounded the counter. He gave her a distracted glance as she approached, clenching his hand close. Can I help you? He asked a bit waspishly. You took the words right out of my mouth, said Tandri. Thanks so much for visiting, and 2 days in a row. I'm just checking to see if you'd like a sample. I assume that's why you're here. Viv had drifted across the room to overhear. A sample. His eyes flicked between her horns and tail, and he seemed puzzled, although he hadn't asked the same question the previous day. Coffee, a latte, you're aware that this is a shop that serves drinks. Oh, he seemed to recover. Well, yes, there's no need. He smiled as though conferring a favor. I'll just be fine without. Tandri's polite smile thinned away, but she deliberately appeared to apply a new one, at a significantly higher wattage. Viv got the distinct impression that Tandri was unveiling the barest edge of something she normally kept cloak. With a subtle purr, she asked, Can I ask what you're doing, Mr. Hemington? He stammered. Well, I would love to, but it's all very technical. He attempted to look apologetic. I'm very interested in technical matters, said Tandri. I've sat in on a few classes at Ackers. Try me, maybe. You have? Hemington blinked. It's to do with ley lines, you see. He warmed to the subject as Tandri slid into the booth across from him and rested her chin on interlaced fingers. A crisscrossed thumb and thumbic thread theory is preoccupied with the radiant effects on the material realm. This is a fascinating intersection with my area of study. He uncurled his hand, and the imprint of a ring of sigils glimmered a faint blue there. The symbol writhed on his palm, reshaping in little licks of light. A ley compass, said Tandri, pointing at it. Viv started at that. Well, yes, he replied, clearly pleased at her recognition. But what I'm finding here is truly anomalous. We see scattered minor line nexuses throughout the city and westward toward Cardis, but I found a nexus right here that is giving some terribly interesting readings. Ley line's pulse, of course, but this nexus holds firm. It's quite extraordinary. So I'm taking some measurements, assembling some notes. This could be the foundation of a fascinating paper detailing their interactions with ward glyphs. Viv had a sick feeling in her stomach and couldn't stop herself from glancing to where the scalbert stone was hidden. She couldn't pretend that it wasn't responsible somehow, and if the student continued with his readings, the mention of a compass was unnerving. And where might that lead him? That is fascinating, Hemington. It is, isn't it? But this is a place of business, she continued. Of course, we'd love to have you as a customer, but the seating here is really intended for patrons. Hemington adopted an expression of annoyed consternation. I don't really drink hot beverages. Tandri ignored his protest and smiled at him sweetly. And fortunately for you, today's samples are free. Yes, well, I suppose, he grudgingly allowed. I will take advantage of that. Excellent. I'll bring you a cup. She rose to return to the counter, but then turned back. Oh, and as a reminder, this is the last day of the promotional period. Only have a bit for our flagship beverage. Thanks ever so much. As Tandri brewed a cup, Viv whispered, "You are an Acres graduate." "Not a graduate as such, just took a few relevant classes." "Relevant to what?" "To personal interests," she replied evasively. Viv didn't press. Tandri delivered the drink to Hemington, who stared at it dubiously and made no move to drink it. After tapping her chin for a moment, Tandri took up the chalk and added another line to the menu. Purchase required to enjoy the dining area. Hemington eventually departed, leaving his untouched drink on the table. At least he had the decency to hover over it for a moment, clearly trying to decide which was least embarrassing, leaving it where it was or bringing the full cup to the front. As he slumped past the counter, he noticed Tandri's fresh addition to the sign. "You know, I would buy something. It's just, as I said, I don't much care for hot drinks. Perhaps if there was something to eat," he said, a note of pleading in his voice. Said Viv, in her best impression of Cal. "I'll take it under advisement." After he left, though, she glanced at the stove the hob had installed, and something nagged at her, a nascent idea. She let that percolate as she went to retrieve Hemington's mug. The shop had mostly emptied, although one dwarf sat tucked away in the back, nursing his drink while he slowly ran his finger over a broad sheet, moving his lips as he read. Viv turned and stopped short. An enormous shaggy creature sat in the center of the shop, sprawled in a square of sunlight. Tandri stood on its other side, eyes wide. The beast had to weigh 10 stone, and was as big as a wolf, but it looked like nothing so much as an enormous, shaggy, slightly sooty house cat. "It just appeared," said Tandri weakly. "I didn't see it coming." "What in the hells is it?" asked Viv. The massive animal ignored them both, but yawned, extended all the claws in its forepaws, and arched its back in a languorous stretch. "Dire cat." A voice piped up from behind Viv. The elderly dwarf looked over from his paper. "Don't see him no more these days. Supposed to be lucky," he squinted. "Or maybe unlucky. I forget. You've seen one before. I used to be more around when I was wee. Good at others." He coughed. "Also kept the stray dog population down. Should we try to remove it?" Tandri blanched. The dire cat regarded first Tandri, then Viv, with green eyes like saucers. Slowly, they drifted to slits, and the rumble of a distant landslide filled the room. Viv realized it was purring. She thought of the thumps of the roof tiles and Laney's pilfered cake. She thought about the lines of burrs and the scalvert stone. "Honestly," said Viv, "if I've learned one thing, it's that if a beast isn't angry yet, don't get it started. I think I'll leave it be. Maybe it'll wander off." "I'm pretty sure it lives around here." Tandri nodded dubiously and edged behind the counter. The elderly dwarf folded his broadsheet under his arm, hopped down, and strode past the cat, giving it a scratch behind one of its enormous ears. "I Good girl, he said. Missed seeing him around. How can you tell it's a girl? Asked Andre. The dwarf shrugged. Guessing, but I ain't gonna lift her tail to find out, that's for sure. The tired cat did not leave, but Viv did manage to lure it to a less central corner of the shop with a dish of cream. The animal approached with a magisterial grace, surveyed the room, and then emptied the dish with a tongue as big as a spade. Then it resettled in a great shaggy heap. The sound of its rumbling purr trembled, and it fell asleep. Tandri was visibly relieved to have the creature out of the way. The cafe was empty again, in what Viv was beginning to suspect would be the slowest part of the day, although she was hopeful they'd get at least a visitor or two. But the one who appeared at the threshold was the last person she wanted to see. Venice strode into the shop, hands behind his back, his perfume trailing like a cloak. His hair was pinned up fashionably, expression arc. The elf had always possessed a regal bearing. Viv couldn't understand how he managed to look down his nose at her, even though she was 2 hands taller. She'd crewed with him for years, and neither had warmed to the other. Viv tried to chalk it up to personality conflict, but deep down she knew that it was a mutual dislike. Venice always found a way to make her feel less than with the barest twist of inflection, or a carefully chosen word slipped like a knife between the ribs. So sharp you didn't notice the wound until you looked up from a lap full of blood. And Viv wasn't above a blunt riposte, even if it often came far too late. She'd assumed she'd never see him again and would be glad of it. The fact that he was darkening her doorway meant he wanted something. She very much hoped she was still wrong. Still, she forced a smile. Venice, surprised to see you here. His smile was even more false than hers, although it hardly marred his beauty. Viv, I had heard from Rune that you'd set up on... He glanced her on with a perfectly wrinkled brow. Enterprise. I thought I'd see it for myself. And how is Rune? Oh, well, very well. He ran a finger along the countertop and inspected it. Tandri watched the exchange with pursed lips and clearly noticed the electric buzz of tension. Javin mix. Hi, hello, welcome to the chat. Hey bro, one question. Sure, depends on what your question is. But yeah, welcome to the Chipped Cup Cafe. Hope you enjoy your stay here. Do you use a kind of sound card or voice meter to make your voice be picked up so beautifully, or like it sounds really good, your mic? Honestly, I'm just using a very basic USB mic right now. I don't have any fancy sound cards or voice meters. I am using OBS's built-in sort of audio filters, actually. Well, yeah, thank you for asking. I haven't delved into anything really technical with sound design. As for what mic, I believe it's called a Red Dragon. Sadly, I don't have a mic command for that yet. I probably should one day, but it's like a simple Red Dragon I just got online for like about $10, 500 pesos thereabouts. Or was it 1,000? It's about $10 to $20. Red Dragon. But yeah, feel free to just sit back and relax and enjoy the cozy novel of Legends and Lattes. We're currently at chapter 10 right now. It's really good, yeah? Oh, thank you then. Okay, now where were we? Oh, well, very well. He ran a finger along the countertop and inspected it. Yes, it was Hay's gift to me. For those who are new in the chat, Hay is both my mod and my partner. So she would be much more knowledgeable on what the mic specifics were. Baldree watched the exchange with pursed lips and clearly noticed the electric buzz of tension, leaning on the counter and adopting a smile. She addressed the elf. Hello there. I don't want to interrupt, but would you care for a sample? It's a grand opening promotion. Grand opening. Just the slightest quirk to the first word, the tiniest caress of amusement. Ah, is this that gnomish beverage you were so taken with? He glanced at Viv with an indulgent smile. No, not for me. Thank you kindly. I'm just stopping in to see an old friend. A pleasure, said Viv. It wasn't. Yes, so excellent to see you off to such a promising start. The elf surveyed the conspicuously empty dining area, maintaining his smile. He delicately rapped at the knuckle against the coffee maker and cocked an ear at the subtle tone it generated. It does indeed have the ring of fortune about it. Viv froze. Then suddenly a furry bulk stalked past her in front of Finnis, and the rocks down the washboard sound of its purr became soothing, something rather altogether more menacing. The dire cat's hair stood on end, making it look half again as large, and it hissed louder than the coffee maker ever had. Finnis eyed the animal uncertainly. Is this thing yours? Baldree leaned further forward and surprised Viv with her tone of politely savage delight. She is a bit of a shop mascot. He wrinkled his nose in distaste. And then his eyes flipped to Viv. Charming. Well, I suppose I'll be on my way. I only wanted to deliver my congratulations. Best wishes, Viv. She silently watched him leave, and Baldree came around the corner to hunker in front of the enormous cat, which was now licking one forepaw with regal deliberation, and looking pleased with itself. Baldree's prior apprehension forgotten, she scratched behind the dire cat's ears, eliciting a deeper purr, and murmured, "You're a good girl, aren't you? You know a dickhead when you see one." She looked at Viv. Old co-worker? No love lost between you two, I guess. Something like that. Being the best of friends isn't a requirement for the work I used to do. Baldree returned her attention to the cat. We need a name. How about Amity? Viv snorted, unable to suppress a small smile. Why not, since you're already such fast friends? Not like you and him. Baldree jerked a thumb toward the recently departed elf. What do you think he really wanted? Viv didn't answer. Instead, thinking what Fennis had said, her hand went to the folded scrap of verse she kept in her pocket. Well nigh to Thomic line, the Scalbert's stone of fire draws the ring of fortune, prospect of heart's desire. Chapter 11. Despite a fitful sleep plagued with worries over Fennis, Viv eventually steered her thoughts to Hemington's parting comments about food. While she ruminated, Tawdry blacked out the lines on the signboards, mentioning free samples and limited supplies, and adjusted the menu while she was at it. When the regulars returned, plus a few new faces, Viv noted with pleasure that they paid for their drinks without complaint. Viv and Tawdry shared a relieved glance and got down to business, enjoying the warm bustle behind the hissing machine. Carl stopped in again too, obviously relieved there was no silence to fill with idle observations. He groused when Viv refused his copper, but hovered by the counter while he drank, nodding every once in a while as he watched them work. Remembering the idea she'd been toying with, Viv asked Tawdry to handle brewing duties halfway through the rush. Tawdry smoothly took up orders while Viv went to find the ratkin, tucked away in one of the back corners of the booths, feet swinging, eyes closed, meditating over his steaming mug. She slid in across from him, and his bright eyes stopped or opened to regard her warily. He was wearing the same apron she'd seen him in every morning, whitened liberally with flour. A close, pale powder flecked the fine hairs on his arms and face as well. "Hi there, I'm Viv." He nodded and slurped at his latte. Not too talkative, he shook his head. "That's all right. But I wanted to ask you something. I noticed your..." She gestured at his apron, well, the flour, and I wondered if you happen to know anything about baking. The ratkin stared at her, whiskers twitching, and gently set down his mug, then gave a slow triple nod. "You do? So I have something of an idea. I'm thinking what this place might need is some breads, or something baked, to eat." She squeezed an invisible loaf between her hands. "Stacks, I guess. Not something I know much about, though. But I thought, well, if you did know something about that..." The ratkin raised a tentative paw to forestall her, leaning forward over his drink. In a tiny, breathy voice, he said, "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" He nodded again, eagerly, Viv thought. She didn't know whether he had to be on his way or needed a few hours to think, but despite her curiosity, she wasn't going to press the matter. She rapped on the table and stood. "I'll look forward to it, Mr. He stared up at her and in a small, solemn whisper said, "Thimble." "Okay, Thimble," Viv agreed. Then she gave him a nod and returned to the counter. The afternoon again became a desert of inactivity. Hemington returned and purchased a drink, a pained expression on his face, and once more left it untouched. Viv wiped down the tables in the empty dining area, gathering dirty mugs. Suddenly, Tawdry's voice cut through the hush, her tone icy. "What are you doing here?" Tawdry glared at the young man who leaned over the countertop, gazing back at her in an overly familiar way. His soft handsomeness hinted at money, and while he wasn't wearing the split robes Hemington wore, Viv saw one of the stag pins on his tailored shirt. "Saw you through the window and just had to stop by," he replied. "Haven't seen you in a while, Tandri. I'd almost think you were avoiding me." And you'd be right. Well, I'm only a customer here, so we can call this as an intervention of fate. You just said you saw me through the window. If fate intervenes, it'll be to turn you around and send you right back out. Now don't be that way. A succubus like you, we can feel this. He gestured between them. This attraction. I know you can. Oh, this dude sounds like a prick. Tawdry looked stricken, and then her expression became deliberately neutral. "Callan, there is no attraction. There never has been. I think you should leave." "But I haven't bought anything yet," he protested, a smile on his voice. "I don't think we have anything you want," said Viv, approaching the front of the shop and looming, arms crossed. Cal turned his attention to her. His easy smile vanished, replaced by something sharper. "I don't remember involving you in this conversation." Viv was mildly surprised he hadn't quailed at the sight of her. "It's my shop," said Viv evenly. "I serve who I want, when I want. I don't think I want to serve you, so I'll ask you to leave." Kellen stared at her hard for a moment, a sneer developing. "I don't guess you've met the Madrigal yet. At some point everybody around here serves them, which means that sooner or later you're going to be paying your dues to me." "Oh, so you're his errand boy. I thought that was the man with the very fine hat." He was about to retort when Amity emerged from behind Viv and strolled by with deadly grace. She settled beside Tandri and indifferently licked a massive paw. Callan blinked, but recovered his sneer. Viv couldn't decide if he was brave or stupid. Excuse me. "Okay, I'll leave for now," he said, "but you'll be seeing me again." He looked at Tandri again with that soft proprietary smile. "But you and me will catch up later. Looking forward to it. Fate." He left. Tandri released a slow breath. "What was that all about?" asked Viv. He was a student at Acres. He had Tandri searched for the words, "an unhealthy obsession with me." "Then you took classes there for personal interests?" "Yes." "Yes, he's working for the head of the local hunts too. Seems the education didn't lead to better things. No, I'm not surprised at all. We'll keep him out." The succubus crouched next to the dire cat. "Or maybe Amity needs a snack. Are you hungry, girl?" Amity purred like a rock fall. That evening, Tandri left long enough to collect some blankets and a big goose down pillow. She and Viv put together a makeshift bed in the back corner of the shop for the dire cat. Next time Amity reappeared, she stalked over to the rumpled pile, patted it experimentally with one enormous forepaw, and then strolled away. "But They left the bed. Thimble rapped on the front door as the two of them prepared to open. In his hands he clutched a cloth-wrapped lump that trailed wisps of steam. Viv smelled something warm and yeasty and sweet, and she thought she recognized cinnamon too. He scuttled indoors. Tandri emerged from the pantry with a bag of beans and a carafe of milk, inhaling deeply. What is that wonderful smell? Ratkin glanced anxiously between them and slid his wrapped bundle onto the countertop. Viv pointed at it. May I? Thimble nodded hesitantly. Carefully unfolding a cloth, Viv revealed a roll as big as her fist, almost too large to imagine eating. Soft bread round in a spiral with dark sugar and cinnamon nestled between the rings, and a thick, creamy glaze frosted at the top, dripped down the sides. Tandri was right. The scent was unbelievably amazing. You made this? I did, whispered the Ratkin again, with a little bobbing nod, his hand clasped before his flour-dusted apron. Viv and Tandri shared a glance, and Viv delicately tore a piece from the enormous roll, sniffed deeply, and popped it into her mouth. She closed her eyes and made an involuntary noise of pleasure. It was easily the most delicious thing she'd had in, well, maybe ever. Good God, she murmured around the mouthful. Tandri, try it. Tandri peeled off a piece and obliged. As she chewed, Viv could almost feel some kind of atmospheric shift around Tandri. A sultry radiance, and her tail lashed back and forth in elegant loops. Viv and the Ratkin watched her chew, rapt. When the succubus opened her eyes again, her irises were huge, cheeks flushed. She looked dreamily at the Ratkin. You're hired. Her voice had gone husky. Then she startled and glanced at Viv. The aura dissipated. Wait, that is why he's here, isn't it? Viv turned to Thimble. How would you like to bake these here every day? He nodded and shifted from foot to foot, as though he wanted to say something. But couldn't find the words. 4 silver a week, Viv prompted. She looked at Tandri to make sure there would be no objection. The succubus nodded, eyes big, and made a yes, yes, get on with it, flapping with her hands. Thimble nodded an affirmative. He stretched out his nose, for the first time uttered more than one word in his silky whisper. Free coffee? Viv offered a hand. Thimble, you can have all the coffee you want. Alright, chapter 12. When Thimble reported for duty, he had a much-stained scrap of parchment in his paws. He bobbed his way into the shop and slid it over the countertop, patting it gently. Tandri picked it up to scan. It was a list, written in a crabbed and slanting script. It's so cozy, yes, yes it is. Flour, soda, cinnamon, dark sugar, salt. These are ingredients, she said. The Ratkin nodded earnestly, pointing at the parchment and some supplies. Tandri added as she finished reading. Looks like some pans, bowls. Thimble scurried to investigate the area behind the countertop. and peered into the pantry as well, tapping his lip with one claw as he took inventory. I seem to have lost where we were. Oh, there we go. Here we go. He gestured for the paper, and Tandri returned it to him with an amused smile. Seizing a stylus from under the counter next to the cash box, he stood on tiptoe to add a few more items to the list before nodding decisively. If Thimble could communicate without speaking, that certainly appeared to be his preference. And this is what you'll need to make more of those rolls. The one with cinnamon, asked Viv. Thimble affirmed in the expected way. Any idea where I can get all this? Viv asked Tandri. Not immediately, no. I'm sure I can find a baker, but Thimble interrupted by pulling on Viv's sleeve and pointing to himself. I shall. Oh, sure. Well, no time like the present, I guess. Tandri, you're fine with holding things down till we get back? Of course. The Rakin shifted from foot to foot and stared longingly at the coffee machine. Coffee first, he pleaded. Thimble took his time with his drink, clearly appreciating every sip in what had become his favorite booth. The morning rush was in full swing before he finished and carried his mug to the front, where he waited by the door until the last customer in line had ordered. Guess we'll be going, said Viv, drying her hands and joining him. Tandri gave her a distracted nod, a frothing milk for a bleary-eyed gate warden. Just as they prepared to leave, Amity drifted across the threshold like a low-lying thunderhead, and Thimble froze without so much as a squeak. No howls, hissed Viv, preparing to hoist the ratkin out of reach at the dire cat's slightest aggressive twitch. But Amity only blinked slowly, licked her nose, and then wandered past with marked disinterest. The beast's visits were so infrequent and unpredictable, Viv hadn't spared a moment's thought for how the cat might regard their baker. Or maybe Viv trusted the stone and there'd never be a danger from the start. They left the shop, and Viv followed the ratkin as he scampered to the merchant district on the side. It took the better part of the morning to gather everything Thimble needed, and Viv found herself thoroughly lost on several occasions. When they visited the mill, she bought flour from the same miller she'd rented the cart from. For a few bits extra, he threw some empty sacks to carry the jumbo bundles, sealed jars, and pieces of crockery remaining on Thimble's list. The ratkin never hesitated, navigating unerringly through a warren of alleys and streets. They visited various shops, and several times he rapped on the door of a private residence. In one notable case, they visited a bespectacled old man whose house swam with a hazy mix of exotic scents. Each time Thimble tapped his list to request an item of the proprietor, then looked expectantly at Viv until she paid. The list conquered, Viv limped awkwardly to the shop, with 4 flour bags over one shoulder, bulging sacks clenched in a fist, and the rest tucked under the opposite arm. Her lower back was complaining again. Thimble marched before her, clutching an armload of wooden spoons. When they arrived, Viv sidled past Hemington and two other customers into the back and unburdened herself with a sigh of relief. Thimble immediately set to unpacking and arranging his prizes in the pantry, struggling gamely under the weight of the flour sacks, but declining any assistance with a sharp shake of his furry head. Viv shrugged and left him to it. "Find everything?" asked Tandri. "Sure, seems to be everything," Viv groaned, cracking her spine. Thimble popped up between them, shocking them both with his longest utterance yet, enough to be getting on with. Then he returned to his parcels with gusto. After massaging away the worst of her back pain, Viv took over for Tandri as they served the latest round of customers. Behind the two of them, Thimble hummed tunefully to himself. The clatter of pans and bowls and wooden spoons was followed by much measuring and scraping and stirring. He quickly appropriated the small table they'd be using as a drying rack, clambered up on the footstool, and began kneading out his dough. A mist of flour drifted around him as he worked. While the dough rose, he approached with a nervous twitch of whiskers and whispered, "Latte." I gotta say, Thimble is a big mood. Very relatable, Thimble. Very relatable. His whole body wriggled with pleasure. I describe it later. After all the customers were served, Viv and Tandri watched curiously as he resumed his work. He smoothed out the dough with his new pin, spread a thick cinnamon filling across in a glistening layer, and carefully rolled it into a long cylinder. He sliced it evenly, peeled apart the rolls, and deposited them neatly in the pan. While the dough rose a second time, he lit the stove, threw fistfuls of sugar into a bowl with butter and milk, and stirred vigorously to make a glaze. A pleasant yeast and sugar smell pervaded the shop. This is making me very hungry. This is making me very hungry, Chad, if I'm being completely honest. I'm sorry if some of you haven't eaten anything yet, so maybe this is just a good reminder to get breakfast. Once the rolls had risen to his satisfaction, he hopped down to slide them into the side box, then sat on the stool, steepled his fingers, and patiently waited. The scent that arose from the stove was now impossible to ignore. Good gods, murmured Tandri. It smells amazing. I almost can't stand it. Viv was about to agree, but then looked up as she caught motion from the corner of her eye. A carpenter, with the shavings and his hair were anything rolled by, swayed in the entry, his expression foggy. He sniffed hugely, then blinked. He just stood there for a minute, glancing quizzically around the shop and at the menu. "Help you?" asked Viv. He opened his mouth, closed it, and took another deep lungful. "I'll have whatever it is you have," he said. He took the coffee Tandri brewed, paid dreamily, drifted into the dining area, and sat. He absently sipped his drink while staring off into the distance. Tandri and Viv raised their eyebrows at each other. Eight hells, what is that smell? Asked a voice they both recognized. Laney approached the counter. "Got a new baker." Viv cocked a thumb at Thimble. "Still in the oven, eh? Well, miss, don't mind telling you that I'm relieved. Didn't want to spit speak ill of the coffee, but bacon is more liable to keep you afloat, and I pride myself on my baking, so you can trust my judgment. She pressed a modest hand to her bosom. Viv kept her face carefully neutral, thinking of Lainey's cake. Well, won't keep you, continued the old woman. But when you some to sell, you set aside for me, here? I sure will. As Lainey hobbled out of the shop, 3 customers entered behind her, and beyond them, Viv could see passers-by, slowing and glancing around curiously as they entered a cloud of scent was pouring out the door. It looked like the afternoon might not be so lean after all, and they hadn't sold a single roll yet. Viv and Tandri held a hurried conference. Viv thought they should charge 2 copper bits per roll, but Tandri laid a hand on her forearm, stared at her seriously, and said 4 bits, Viv. 4 bits. They took down the menu slate. Tandri quickly added a new entry, and in economical strokes, an illustration of a pastry, complete with sinuous lines representing the incredible smell. The new edition read, cinnamon roll, heavenly frosted cinnamon pastry. 4, Viv asked again as she reseated the menu on the wall. Really? Trust me. Thimble hopped off a stool, took up a thick dish towel, cracked open the stove, and withdrew the rolls. They were enormous, and golden and beautiful. The smell billowed out in a wave as he placed them on the stovetop and closed the door. Viv thought Tandri might have involuntarily moaned, and her own stomach growled noisily. The ratkin drizzled them with a thick creamy icing that he'd kept to the side, sniffed experimentally, and nodded in satisfaction. Viv looked up to find Hemington staring with interest at the rolls. What an incredible smell, he said. Well, you said you wanted something to eat. You can be first in line. Ah, said Hemington, looking embarrassed. Well, you see, I have certain dietary restrictions. I don't exactly eat bread. Viv's brows drew low, then she leaned heavily on the counter. I'll just buy one though, shall I? He said lamely. Thank you. Need. At Thimble's nod of encouragement, Tandri transferred the warm rolls onto a platter, one by one, and reverently set them on the counter. As Hemington paid, Viv handed him a roll on a piece of waxed paper. If you don't eat this, it's possible Tandri or I may have to kill you. The young man laughed, although the laugh became strangled when Viv didn't join in. He slunk back to his books, with the roll balanced carefully on both palms. Anyone who had been in the dining area was already in line, waiting for their turn, and within 30 minutes, every last roll was gone. Tandri stared at the crumb-strewn plate, ran a finger through a dribble of glaze, licked it off, and looked bleakly at Viv. I didn't even get to have one, she said. I would have paid more than 4 bits. Well, you're in luck, said Viv. Seems like you'll get another chance. I don't like to think what Lainey will do with that broom, if we don't remember to set one aside for her too. Thimble was already busily mixing up a new batch, humming again, louder and happier than before. chapter 13. We've gotten quite far here. With Thimble already elbow deep in his baking before dawn, and with Tandri strategically crackling the door ahead of time to let the smell creep into the street, the opening crowd was easily triple the prior days. That was close. Tandri and Viv brewed side by side. Okay, I had to cough there. Working both handles in a flustered but energized confusion, nearly tripping over one another to fill orders. Thimble's cinnamon rolls disappeared in minutes, but he had wisely already set more dough to rise, while the first batch was in the oven. With the stove running full blast, the shop was hotter than usual, and muggy from the steaming rolls. Both women sweated through their shirts within the hour. The chatter of the crowd, Thimble's clatter, and the hiss and rumble of the gnomish coffee machine filled the air with a dizzying madness. As the morning crept toward noon, the crowd slackened but never lapsed for more than 10 minutes. Thanks for the follow, Chronic J420. Welcome to the Chipped Cup Cafe, where you end up going when you don't really know where you're headed. My name is Moka Kahvesi. You can just call me Moka. And we're currently reading Legends of Lattes. We've gone right up until chapter 13 just about now. So yeah, feel free to enjoy your stay, relax, and enjoy the good read. It's a very cozy story. As the morning crept toward noon, the crowd slackened but never lapsed for more than 10 minutes. The dining area sang with a lively clamor, and the rumble of conversation pervaded. Cat tag, not sure why. That's alright. Thank you for the follow nonetheless, Chronic J. Customers dallied longer, enjoying their baked goods and sipping their drinks without hurrying, and for the first time, more sat at the big communal table than sought the relative solitude of a booth. Viv leaned on the counter studying their faces and saw, at last, what she'd been too nervous to hope for. She found it in half-lidded eyes and a slow, deliberate swallow. The cupped hands around the warmth of a mug and the lingering enjoyment of that last taste. It was the echo of her own experience, and a pleasant flush of recognition washed over her. "You haven't stopped smiling in an hour," said Tandri, startling Viv out of the wool gathering during a brief lull. "I haven't." "Nope." They're both red-faced and too warm, but Viv couldn't help but notice how much more relaxed Tandri seemed today. Viv liked it. Just feels like everything lined up. I had the same feeling a few times before, like when I found black blood. Viv tipped her head toward the blade on the wall, She just felt at home in my hands, and when I went to use her, well, realizing where that story went, she stopped short. Anyway, this feels right. It does. There's still some kinks to work out, though. I think you can rest on your laurels for a day or two, said Tawdry with her eye smile. I don't know, we might boil to death in the meantime. Thimble appeared between them, and they looked down. He glanced up at Viv and tugged at the hem of her shirt, pointed to the oven, and spread his arms wide. Sorry, I don't know what you mean, Thimble. His nose wriggled, and he whispered, bigger. Would be better. Bigger. The rolls? Oh, that is as big as my head. He shook his head. Stove. He quailed. Sorry. Viv glanced over at the oven Cal had installed. Thimble had worked non-stop, and the rolls sold out almost as instantly as they cooled. Perhaps demand would taper off a little, but she could certainly see how the pace might run the poor Ratkin ragged. A bigger stove would make it easier to stay on top of things. I'd like to, Thimble, but I don't know how we could fit it in. It's already getting pretty tight back there. Thimble looked downcast for a moment, but he nodded in reluctant agreement. If only they could keep longer, mused Tawdry aloud. If they didn't have to be fresh, then we could hold them in reserve and take some of the pressure off. Ratkin stared at her, tapped his lower lip thoughtfully with a claw, and blinked a few times. He slowly meandered back to his dough, rolling out a fresh sheet, but Viv noticed that he paused every once in a while to stare off into the distance. When Cal dropped by for the first time in days, Viv immediately handed him a cinnamon roll. He examined it curiously and took a modest bite. His response was entirely predictable. And it was a good sort of He nodded at the busy dining area while he chewed and swallowed. Looks as though things are ticking right along. And this, he looked at the roll appreciatively. This is mighty fine. Told you that stove might show itself worthy. Didn't suppose I could have one of those lattes to go with. He examined the menu and slid 6 bits onto the countertop. Viv slid them right back. You keep those, and I've got some more for you if you think you can. If you can't think of something to do about the heat in here. It's hot as the 8 hells when the stove is going. He chewed another bite, closing his eyes with a pleased sigh. Well, I may have a thought, but I might need a piece of time to see it'll work. Something I saw on a gnomish pleasure craft. Very clever. Viv was intrigued. Some kind of window. Nope, not a window. Don't get your hopes up if it ain't workable. You give me a day or two, I'll see what I can see. Try not to burn down the place now and then. He favored her with one of his thin but genuine smiles. Then he took his drink and his roll and ambled into the dining area. Later in the day, business held steady with customers trickling in and out, often enough to keep them occupied but not harried. As Viv dried her hands for what must have been the 8th time after washing mugs in the basin, a big fellow with the look of a farm hand entered the shop. Viv was perplexed to see some kind of loot tucked under one arm. Thick sheaves of yellow hair kept falling over his eyes, and his hands were as enormous and rough as her own, which seemed odd for a musician. Help you? She asked. Hello there. I wanted to ask if I... Wait, hello, he stammered, starting over. My name is Pendry. I'm a... His voice dropped very low, almost to a whisper. Bard? It sounded more like a question. Congratulations, replied Viv in an amused tone. I was wondering if I could maybe entertain? In here, I mean. Viv was taken aback. I hadn't really thought about anything like that before, she admitted. Oh, well, that's fine. He nodded hugely, his hair flopping against his cheeks. She couldn't be sure, but she thought he might be relieved. Are you any good? Asked Tandri, coming around the counter and crossing her arms. Well, Viv snorted and nudged Tandri gently in the ribs. Tell you what, said Viv, thinking of Scalbert's stole and the feeling of snapping closed she experienced. Everything's slotting into place. Why don't you go ahead? You're not asking for anything but permission, right? Pendry looked a bit sick to his stomach. Yes, no, okay. Then he just stood there. Tandri made a shooing motion. Go on ahead then. Her expression was severe, but Viv could tell she was trying not to smile. The farmhand or bard or whatever he was shuffled into the other room and looked around with barely suppressed horror on his face. He made his way to the back, head down, and turned slowly around. Nobody paid him much attention, and he simply stood there for a few minutes, strangling his lute, fidgeting with the tuning pegs, and murmuring under his breath. Viv was pretty sure he was arguing with himself, and she peered curiously around the corner at him. The lute was odd. She'd never seen one like it before. There didn't seem to be an opening in the front for resonance. Instead, there was a slab of some sort, of slate-like stone underneath the string, with silver pins embedded in it. She almost thought he'd fold under his anxiety and slink back out of the shop. But he took a deep breath and began to strum. The noise that emerged was unlike anything she'd expected, and all conversation cut short. There was a raw, wailing edge to the notes, much louder than any lute Viv had ever heard before. She flinched and saw others do the same as Pendry began playing in earnest. The sound the man produced wasn't unmusical, but there was something almost savage about it. She wondered if maybe her trust in the Scalbert's stone to draw what she needed here might have been a bit too blind, because if this was its doing. She wondered if maybe her trust... I'm sorry, we just read that part. Viv glanced at the patrons, who looked uncomfortable. A few rose as though they were preparing to leave. She started to approach the young man, who, for a wonder, looked fully relaxed at this point, lost in the music. As she drew near, his eyes fluttered open, and he saw her. He glanced around the room and absorbed the shocked expressions of the people there, and abruptly stopped playing. Pendry. Viv held up a hand. Oh gods, he moaned, and clearly mortified, and he fled the shop, his lute held before him like a shield. Viv felt sorry for the kid, but the afternoon rush put him out of her mind. Demand for baked goods tapered off enough that Thimble could rest, and eventually Viv sent the poor Ratkin home. He was knackered, and Viv got the impression that if she didn't cut him off, he'd work himself into unconsciousness. As she returned from clearing tables, she found Tandri sitting by the front window. It's not Kellum again, is it? No, nothing like that. What then? That old man. Viv leaned out the door to look. Seated at one of their tables was an elderly gnome wearing a curious bent cap, like a small sack, and dark spectacles. Before him was a mug, a cinnamon roll, and a a chessboard with little ivory pieces on it. Nobody was seated across from him. Curled around the base of the table, however, was Amity, purring in a contented rumble. The huge cat remained an infrequent visitor and shunned the bed of blankets they'd made, so it was a surprise to see her in repose. Amity seems to like him. Viv shrugged. I must be missing something, though. He's been there for an hour. He came in after our would-be bard, and I can't figure out who's moving the other pieces. He's playing by himself. Baldree nodded, but he never seems to move for the other side, or at least I've never caught him doing it. You managed to track that out of the corner of your eye. I mean, at first I didn't pay attention, but now I can't help but keep glancing over. Well, said Viv, we've had Hell's own bard here today. We're not a chess-playing phantom. I'll catch him doing it sometime, Baldree said, nodding decisively. Then two gate wardens crowded through the door to buy out the rest of the rolls. They promptly forgot about the gnome. Alright. And I think we can end it here, chat. That was about as long as we did last time we started reading this, so I think it was a good set of progress. We made another 7 chapters as well. So yeah, I'm actually really enjoying this book so far. As much as I'd like to read it off stream, I do want to sort of share that experience with other viewers as well. Hopefully give them a nice cozy day. So yeah, once again, my name is Moka Kahvesi. I'm the barista and narrator here tonight at the Chipped Cup Cafe, where you end up when you don't really know where you're headed. I do sincerely hope all of you who decided to stay, even if it was for just a while, a moment, or the entire stream, did enjoy this very nice cozy story. Thank you to my mods. And thank you to Hay as well for sitting in as well the entire night, even though she was on shift. I do have an idea of someone to raid, so let me just grab his Twitch. I believe he's online right now, which is rather perfect. As a little show of thanks. Okay, let me just create a very quick yes, I need to type very quickly. Otherwise I'm going to end up mucking up the raid message. Okay, let's go with that. So we'll be raiding Best Dad Tuber. He's a very good sort of inspiration to me when I came into trying ASMR. So yeah, hopefully you all enjoyed your stay and may you have a good day, afternoon, or night. Goodbye now.